Sesame Street, especially Elmo and Cookie Monster, are a really big deal in our house. So when my son received a Sesame Street book for his birthday, he was very excited. And as I read it, I was excited too. It's called We're Different, We're the Same. In it, they show pictures of lots of different people and Muppets to explain some of the amazing ways that we can be different, while also showing some of the amazing ways that we all are the same. For example, it says, we're different. Our noses are different. And we're the same. Our noses are the same. They breathe and sniff and sneeze and whiff. Another page says our skin is different. And our skin is the same. It tells us something is cold or hot or wet or dry. It knows a lot. It keeps in warmth. It keeps out dirt. It warns us so we won't get hurt. You see, there are lots and lots and lots of ways that we are different. Our noses are different. Our skin is different. Our eyes and ears and mouth and hair and height and bodies and thoughts and feelings and so much more can be different. And that is beautiful. God created a world that is so beautifully diverse, like a rainbow. But at the same time, there are lots and lots and lots of ways that we are the same. The biggest way that we are all the same is that each and every single person that you meet in this life is a beloved child of God, beautifully and wonderfully made. And in the same way, you are a beloved child of God, beautiful and wonderfully made. Don't ever forget it. And don't ever let the world make you not believe it. Oh, child of God. With that, I say, Amen.
This morning's reading is from Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 20. If another member of the church sins against you, go out and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be lost in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them.
Owe no one anything, except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is fulfilling of the law. Besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us live honorably as in the day, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. "1918 plus 1929 plus 1968 equals 2020. I can't stop thinking about this headline that I heard recently, probably because it feels so true. In 1918, the Spanish flu raced around the world and killed millions of people in its path. In 1929, the Great Depression struck. And in 1968, our country was riven by racial injustice and the quest for civil rights. I will admit that when I heard that Hurricane Laura was on its way to strike Louisiana, all I could think about was Katrina. And I thought to myself, oh, great, now we're going to live 2005 too. All of America's greatest hits, so many of the hard years that we have faced as a country, all put together in one epic moment. 2020, the absolute worst year ever. I jest. But in this profound piece, Jonathan Rosenberg and Manu Bhagavan poignantly wrote this. They said, "What is especially overwhelming about the current moment is that each of these pivotal years seem to have come back to haunt us at the same time. But," they say, "ghosts survive because they cannot rest. And more precisely, because difficult challenges remain unresolved. What we are witnessing on the nation's streets," they argue, "is a consequence of American denialism, a profound failure to confront the past and to learn from it. And so, we find ourselves on the edge of an abyss." History repeats itself, the old adage says. Those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. These sentiments may feel cliche. Yet as we look out on the world now, it feels deeply and undeniably true. The truth is that often it feels like it's just far too hard to face the complexities of the world around us. And it is far too easy just to go through the motions of this thing that we call life. Honestly, until now, I suspect that many of us have just been sleepwalking. Theologian Karl Barth once said, "One should preach with the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other." Our faith is not and should not be divorced from our politics. Our faith should not and cannot hide from the rest of our lives, from the rest of the world around us, from all of the hard struggles and painful challenges that come across our path. And yet, when life becomes too overwhelming, it can become too easy to pull the covers over our heads. In a sermon I read recently, the Reverend Dr. Alan Brame said, "We pull the covers over our heads to avoid the really difficult issues of life that have been thrust right under our noses on the evening news. We have all kinds of ways of avoiding the hard truths that beg our attention. We lose ourselves in the images that play out on our television screens or in the world of social media. We distract ourselves by overusing alcohol and overusing caffeine. We become workaholics, keeping busy every waking minute. Or we just go shopping, somehow spending money on something, on anything, seems to make us feel like everything's really just fine. But the reality is that we're sleepwalking. We use these and many other distractions to keep from having to face the painful truths in our world. He delivered these words in 2013. And friends, once upon a time, that may have been true. But now, in 2020, we cannot help but face what has been put before us, because life has shaken us so forcefully and so unexpectedly that we have no choice but to wake up. We can no longer simply go through the motions because nothing, absolutely nothing, is the same. And maybe that's not always so bad. Maybe we need to be woke. When you read any of Paul's letters, like the passage that we read today, you have to read it with a kind of apocalyptic fervor. You have to imagine and to hope and to pray like Paul did as he wrote these words, that Christ was going to return at any minute. Each of his letters is filled with that level of excitement and expectation, that abundance of belief. In our passage today, Paul says, "For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone, and the day is near." Paul anticipates that at any moment Christ may return, and he was convinced that Christ's coming would happen soon. In another letter, Paul told all the unmarried followers in the church at Corinth that it would be best if they stayed single, because the world as they knew it was about to end. He took Jesus' words very literally when Jesus taught, "Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have taken place." Of course, that generation did pass away. And here we are, 2,000 years later. And after so very long, it is easy to see why we may lose momentum, why we may lose this hope and expectation. But for Paul, this was the motivation. A fervent belief and an ardent hope that a new day was dawning, that the world as he was about to change. If we stand on the edge of an abyss and look down in fear, Paul stood on that same cliff's edge and looked out with hope to the horizon. Friends, it is no coincidence that protests crying out for racial justice have coincided with this pandemic. Since the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, an estimated 15 to 25 million Americans have taken to the streets to protest police violence and to advocate for Black lives. On June 6th, it is estimated that 500,000 people turned out in nearly 550 places all across the United States. That was a single day in several months of protests that still continue today. Really, it's hard to overestimate the scale of this movement, Diva Woodley, a professor of politics, told the New York Times. Professor Woodley added that the civil rights marches of the 1960s were considerably smaller in number. If we added up all those protests during that period, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, but not millions. If these estimated numbers hold true, then Black Lives Matter may be the largest movement in U.S. history. Why? Not why is there a movement, but why now? These issues have been enduring for years, decades, generations. And yet now is the moment in which it feels like the nation has finally opened its eyes to the profound problems of racial injustice that persist. Why? Why now? Recently, I watched a profound video when the Mets and the Marlins both took to the baseball diamond. Both sides, rivals, stood together for nearly a minute of utter silence, with their hats held over their hearts. And then each side broke this moment of reverence by lifting their hats in the air in an act of solidarity with each other. As together, they all walked off of that diamond in protest. Not a single word was uttered. And yet, that silence rang with power. No baseball will be played today, the announcer finally said as the camera zoomed in on a Black Lives Matter t-shirt that had been draped over home plate. It was one of the most inspirational moments that I have been blessed to witness. 4 years ago, almost exactly to the day, Colin Kaepernick first sat on the bench and then kneeled during the national anthem in a singular act of protest. He was driven from football, perhaps for forever. No team has signed him for this year. And yet, 4 years later, athletes from football and baseball and basketball and tennis and more are all now finally following his lead, using their positions of prominence to speak for Black and brown lives. Again, I ask, why now? The truth is, it's no coincidence. The pandemic has filled these stadiums and arenas and courts and fields with the same urgency and fervency that Paul must have felt way back when. Because they are so empty. Because they are so silent. The Mets and the Marlins stood on a baseball diamond in front of a stadium filled with cardboard cutouts. Not a single fan was allowed to be there. An utter reminder of this really strange time that we are now facing. Cardboard cutouts. That is why these players now had the freedom and the inspiration to find their voice. Right now, we are all collectively facing our own mortality together. And together, we are deciding what matters. Together, we are being shaken awake. Together, we look out upon the abyss, and Paul challenges us to look for the horizon with hope. Brothers and sisters, you know what time it is. Now is the moment for you to wake from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on armors of light. With these words from Paul as your inspiration, go now and face this new world with hope. A new day is dawning. The light is shining. Let us open our eyes. We are woke.